The courtroom held its breath as the gavel fell. This court finds the defendant, Captain Maya Rodriguez, guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Malcolm Hargrove's voice echoed through the chamber, each word slicing like a blade. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Others stared straight ahead, eyes glazed with confusion. Maya didn't flinch. Her posture remained perfectly straight in the defendant's chair, though her hands, cuffed in front of her, trembled slightly on her lap. She looked neither left nor right. She simply stared ahead, jaw clenched, her dark eyes flat and unreadable. The brutal nature of this crime leaves this court with no alternative, the judge continued. Captain Maya Rodriguez, you are hereby sentenced to death by lethal injection. The words fell heavy, final. A hush blanketed the room, broken only by the barely audible shudder of someone weeping in the back row. Sam Winters, her court-appointed attorney, shot to his feet. Your Honor, I must object. But Maya lifted one hand slowly and touched his sleeve, silencing him with a soft but firm voice. Don't, she said, not taking her eyes off the judge. It doesn't matter. No one believes me anyway. Court officers approached. One unlocked her cuffs. Another refastened them behind her back. As they guided her up, she turned her head for the first time toward the back of the room. There, sitting beside a wheelchair, was Atlas, her service dog. A large German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a rigid posture, trained for war and re-entry into civilian hell. His ears perked up the moment their eyes met. Take care of Atlas, Dad, she called out to the man beside the dog. Don't let them put him down. The dog whined and strained at the leash, the sound low and guttural. Victor Rodriguez, a retired sergeant major with deep creases in his bronze, weathered face, didn't respond with words. He only nodded once, firmly, though tears shimmered and slipped down his cheeks. He reached for Atlas's collar and whispered, Easy, boy. I know. I don't believe it either. To the court and press, it was an open and shut case. Colonel James Westfield had been found dead in his home, stabbed through the chest. Maya's fingerprints were on the knife. Her blood was found on the scene. Surveillance footage showed her car parked on a street near Westfield's house an hour before the time of death. And Westfield was, conveniently, the officer who had denied Maya's request for medical leave months earlier. The prosecution painted her as a wounded, unstable veteran with a vendetta. A ticking time bomb finally exploded. What the jury never heard was the truth. That Colonel Westfield had silenced multiple sexual assault allegations in their unit during deployment. That he'd threatened Maya's benefits, called her a liability, and had once told her directly that a soldier with a fake leg and a real attitude doesn't get a future in my army. Those facts, deemed prejudicial by Judge Hargrove, had been barred from testimony. Maya never got to tell her side. Now, no one wanted to hear it. As the officers guided her out of the courtroom, Atlas barked. Loud. Harsh. Desperate. The kind of bark no ordinary pet would make. The sound of a soldier sensing his handler was in danger. The kind of sound that once saved Maya's life in Kandahar when he'd pulled her out of a Humvee before it exploded. Now, no one moved. Everyone just watched. Atlas jerked forward, yanking at the leash. His claws scraped the marble floor. A courtroom officer stepped in, warning Victor to control the dog. But Victor didn't flinch. He let Atlas bark. Let him make everyone hear it. Even as they pulled his daughter away in shackles. Outside, the sky was a heavy gray. Reporters buzzed around the courthouse doors, microphones primed. None of them wanted the truth, just the headline. Decorated black female veteran sentenced to death for officer's murder. Maya didn't even glance their way as she was loaded into the transport van. Inside, she finally exhaled, one long breath like a balloon deflating. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the metal wall. Back in the courtroom, the officers had dispersed. Victor remained seated, one hand still on Atlas's neck, the other gripping the armrest of his wheelchair. Around them, the gallery emptied slowly. Whispers filled the air like smoke. None of it mattered. Atlas sat down heavily beside Victor. His head lowered. His breathing slowed. But his eyes never left the door Maya had disappeared through. Victor looked at him, voice thick. "They think this is over," he murmured. "They think she did it. But I know my daughter. And I know you do too." The dog didn't move. Victor wheeled toward the exit, his movement stiff but steady. "You and me, Atlas," he said quietly. "We're gonna find the truth." Atlas didn't respond. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He only stood up again, steady and tall beside the wheelchair, as though he understood every word. And maybe, just maybe, he did. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The rain came down in sheets as Victor rolled himself up the cracked ramp leading to his modest brick house on the south side of Fayetteville. Atlas padded silently behind him, soaked and shivering, but refusing to leave his side. Inside, Victor pulled the door shut and exhaled heavily, the weight of the courtroom still clinging to his shoulders like a funeral shroud. He didn't even bother to take off his coat. He just sat there in the entryway for a long moment, staring into the dim living room as if the walls themselves held answers. Atlas shook himself off, sending drops of water across the hardwood floor, and then walked to the center of the room where Maya's photograph sat on the mantel above the fireplace. Victor had taken it a week before she deployed for her third tour in Afghanistan. In the picture, she was in full uniform, her beret angled perfectly, a wide smile stretched across her dark, confident face. She had that look she always wore before battle, calm, focused, ready for hell if it came. Victor swallowed hard and looked away. He rolled into the kitchen and reached for the bottle of bourbon above the fridge. He poured a glass but didn't drink. Instead, he sat at the table, staring into the amber liquid as if he could divine justice from its surface. Atlas lay down at his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes closed but body still tense. "Maya wasn't broken," Victor whispered. "Not then. Not now." His voice cracked on the last word, and the sound startled even him. "She gave everything for this country. And they gave her a trial built on lies." His thoughts pulled him backward, spiraling through memory. The first time Maya told him she was enlisting, she was barely 18. She had just graduated high school, a scholarship in hand, a full ride to UNC. But she'd said no. "I want to serve, Dad," she'd told him. "Not in a classroom. Not yet. I want to make a difference with my boots on the ground." He had tried to argue, had warned her of the world she was walking into, especially as a black woman in uniform. But she had stared him down with that stubborn fire in her eyes, the same one her mother had once carried, and he'd known right then she couldn't be stopped. Her first 2 deployments had hardened her, but she came home intact. It was the third that nearly broke her. A roadside bomb during a convoy outside Ghazni took her right leg below the knee. She had been the only survivor in her vehicle. They said Atlas found her buried in the rubble, bleeding and unconscious, and refused to leave her side until the medics arrived. From that day forward, he was more than a service dog. He was family. Victor remembered the long months of rehab, the nights Maya would wake up screaming from flashbacks, her shirt soaked in sweat. Atlas would climb onto her bed and press his body against hers, grounding her, reminding her she wasn't alone. There were days she couldn't walk without crutches, and still she trained. He remembered watching her on the track behind the VA hospital, pushing herself with that black carbon prosthetic that gleamed like a blade in the sun. She had always refused to give up. But then came the fight for benefits. The battle with red tape. The cold indifference of a system that seemed to forget her the moment she left active duty. Westfield had been the last straw. She had asked him for medical leave to deal with her worsening PTSD. Instead, he had humiliated her in front of her peers, denied her request, and filed a formal complaint against her. That was the beginning of her descent, not into rage or violence, but into silence. She stopped talking about her dreams. Stopped running. Stopped smiling. Victor took a sip of bourbon and closed his eyes. They didn't see it, he said aloud. They didn't want to see it. All they saw was a black woman with a combat record and a missing limb, accused of killing the very officer who had tried to bury her. That was all it took for the jury to turn away. Atlas stirred beneath the table and let out a low, breathy whine. Victor looked down. I know, boy. I know. She didn't do it. He reached beneath the table and ruffled the fur behind the dog's ears. But we're gonna prove it. He wheeled into Maya's old room, which hadn't changed since the last time she'd stayed there 2 months before her arrest. Her framed medals still hung on the wall. Her military plaques, the letter from the president thanking her for her service, the newspaper clipping showing her saluting during a homecoming ceremony, it all sat there, untouched, like a museum to a soldier the world had already tried to forget. Atlas followed, sniffing around the room. Victor pulled out a box from under the bed, filled with Maya's deployment gear, letters, a few personal journals. He opened the top and stared at the contents, unsure what he was even looking for. Maybe something the cops missed. Maybe something the lawyers never bothered to examine. Atlas nosed the box. He sniffed deeper, pawed gently at one side, then nudged a folded shirt aside to reveal a small black pouch. Victor opened it and found a simple object inside, a fitness tracker. The kind that monitored steps, distance, and location. He turned it over in his hand, heart pounding. He remembered Maya always wore it when she ran. And she always ran. Every morning. Victor pulled out his phone and opened the tracker's app. The last synced data was from the morning of Westfield's murder. It showed a 5-mile run, nowhere near Westfield's neighborhood. The GPS trail was clear. She hadn't been anywhere close. Victor looked down at Atlas, who now stood staring up at him, tail low but wagging slowly. You knew, didn't you? Victor said softly. You knew she wasn't there. Atlas blinked, then sat down as if waiting for what came next. Victor looked back at the screen and whispered, then let's show them what they missed. That night, as the storm outside deepened, the lights in Maya's room burned late. A war veteran and a loyal dog sat together, not just in grief, but in purpose. Somewhere beyond the lies and broken justice system, the truth still breathed. And together, they were going to bring it back to life. Morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin, golden lines across the living room as Victor sat hunched over the coffee table, eyes bloodshot and bleary. He hadn't slept. The GPS data from Maya's fitness tracker was burned into his mind. The timestamp was ironclad. The mapped route was clear. On the morning Colonel Westfield was killed, Maya had been running on the opposite side of town. The data was still there, buried like a heartbeat in the device no one had bothered to check. He had printed screenshots, copied files, even backed it up onto a flash drive. Still, he couldn't shake the weight of uncertainty. Would it even matter? Would anyone care? Atlas lay curled nearby, awake and watchful, his amber eyes never leaving Victor's face. Every once in a while, his ears twitched at the creak of the old house settling or the distant rumble of traffic, but otherwise he remained still, as though guarding a fragile hope that could shatter if left unprotected. Victor finally reached for his phone and called Sam Winters. The young public defender answered groggily, voice thick with sleep. It's Victor, the old soldier said without preamble. I found something. Something they didn't show in court. Sam hesitated. What kind of something? Proof she wasn't at the scene that morning. GPS from her fitness tracker. It logged her entire run, 5 miles across town. Silence hung for a beat. Then Sam said quietly, "I'm coming over." Less than an hour later, Sam stood in Victor's living room, staring at the laptop screen while Victor explained everything again. The attorney leaned forward, reading the data, his brow furrowing deeper with each scroll. "This wasn't part of discovery," Sam said slowly. "I never saw this. Neither did the prosecution, or they'd have ripped it apart." "It was in her bag," Victor replied. "No one ever searched it properly. The cops boxed it up, tagged it as personal effects. No one thought it mattered." Sam rubbed a hand over his face. "It contradicts the entire timeline. They claimed she drove to Westfield's house that morning, killed him in a rage, then drove home. But this shows she wasn't even in the neighborhood." Victor looked up at him, eyes hard. "Then we use it. Appeal the conviction. Get a stay of execution." "It's not that simple," Sam said, already sounding exhausted. "It's helpful. But not bulletproof. GPS data can be challenged. The defense has to show more than an alternate timeline, we have to show someone else committed the murder." Atlas stood up suddenly and walked over to the far side of the living room, where Maya's military duffel bag sat half-zipped and forgotten since the day she was arrested. He sniffed it once, then began pawing at the side. Sam raised an eyebrow. "He's been doing that all morning." Victor nodded. "Every time I sit with that bag, he gets like this." Atlas barked once, sharp and insistent, then backed up and stared at the bag. Victor wheeled over and pulled it closer. "What is it, boy?" he muttered, unzipping the bag fully. Inside were Maya's running shoes, her spare prosthetic blade, and a few folded t-shirts. Everything looked ordinary at first glance. But Atlas didn't stop. He moved around the side and nosed at the shoes. Victor pulled them out and held them up. They were perfectly clean. He turned them over in his lap. No gravel, no dried mud, no sign they'd ever been worn at a murder scene. Sam took one and examined it himself. Westfield's driveway is covered in crushed granite. If she'd been there, some would have stuck. These are spotless. Victor looked down at Atlas again, who wagged his tail once and then sat expectantly. "That tracker and these shoes prove she didn't kill him. They may not be enough for the courts, but they're enough for me." Sam sighed. "We need more. A smoking gun. A reason for someone else to want Westfield dead." Victor opened his mouth to respond when the doorbell rang. Atlas was on his feet in an instant, body tense, growl building in his throat. Victor wheeled toward the door slowly and looked through the peephole. A woman stood on the porch, her back straight, shoulders squared, military posture unmistakable. Her uniform was civilian, but everything about her screamed army. Victor opened the door a few inches, wary. "Can I help you?" "Sergeant Major Rodriguez," she asked. "I'm Lieutenant Diane Foster. I served under your daughter in Afghanistan. May I come in?" Victor hesitated. "You're a bit late." "I know," she said softly. "But I think it's time I stopped being afraid." Inside, she sat across from Victor and Sam, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Atlas sat beside her now, after cautiously sniffing her hand and giving a quiet woof of approval. She looked at the old man with clear eyes and a steady voice. "I didn't testify because I was warned," she began. "By Major Philip Garrison. He took over Westfield's command after the colonel died. Told me to stay quiet, or my career would end before it started." Victor's fists clenched. "Figures. There's something you need to know," she said, reaching into her coat pocket. "Maya gave me this the day before Westfield was killed." She placed a small USB drive on the coffee table. She said it had evidence. Financial records. Emails. She asked me to keep it safe. Sam leaned forward and plugged it into his laptop. What loaded onto the screen was a trove of spreadsheets, emails, and budget reports, dozens of files showing embezzlement and kickbacks linked to veterans programs and military contracts. Maya had discovered it while trying to track down her denied benefits. Westfield and Garrison were stealing money meant for rehab centers and PTSD support, Foster explained. Maya started asking questions. She wasn't the only person who visited Westfield the night he died. Sam looked up sharply. You're saying someone else was there? Yes. I was monitoring base communications. Garrison visited Westfield's house an hour after Maya left. But that segment of security footage mysteriously vanished. Victor sat back in his chair, stunned. You're saying Garrison killed Westfield? Foster hesitated. I'm saying Maya didn't. As the room fell silent, Atlas shifted again, standing up and moving toward Maya's duffel bag. He sniffed once, then walked toward the front door, turned, and looked back. Sam narrowed his eyes. What's he doing? Victor stared at the dog and whispered, he wants us to follow. And just like that, the next chapter in their search for justice began, not with a courtroom, not with a lawyer, but with a dog who refused to give up. Victor grabbed his coat and backpack while Sam pocketed the flash drive. Lieutenant Foster laced her boots with a precision born of years in uniform, her jaw set as she rose. Atlas stood at the front door, tail low and stiff, his entire body coiled with purpose. There was no hesitation in his movement, no uncertainty. He knew where he was going. Victor opened the door without question and followed his daughter's service dog out into the damp night. The streets were quiet, the fading light casting long shadows as Atlas led them through the neighborhood. His pace was brisk, and he never looked back. Victor wheeled over cracks and uneven concrete with practiced ease, never once asking where they were going. He didn't have to. Atlas had that same look in his eyes that Maya used to get during patrols, steady, locked in, unshakable. Sam glanced around nervously, the paranoia starting to creep in. Do we even know what we're walking into? He asked under his breath. We're following the one soul who's been telling the truth since day one, Victor replied without looking up. If Atlas thinks there's something to see, then there is. They moved through alleys and quiet streets until they reached the edge of Fort Braden's perimeter, the military base where Maya had been stationed. Atlas stopped at a side service entrance, a chain-link gate that led to a storage area surrounded by tall fences. He whined low, pacing in a small circle, then sat and stared at the gate. It's locked, Foster said, glancing around. This area is for maintenance equipment. Construction supplies. Why would he bring us here? Victor wheeled forward and tugged gently at the gate. To his surprise, it wasn't locked. The chain had been looped but never secured. He looked up at Foster. Because someone didn't want anyone getting in, or seeing what they left behind. Atlas pushed through the narrow opening without hesitation, and the others followed. They stepped into a yard cluttered with old pallets, rusted dumpsters, and broken fencing. It smelled of wet wood and gasoline. Atlas moved quickly now, weaving between piles of scrap until he reached a large green dumpster in the far corner. He sniffed along the base, then circled once, finally sitting down and looking up at Victor with an intensity that made the old soldier's skin prickle. Sam stepped forward cautiously and lifted the heavy plastic lid. The smell hit him first, rotting drywall, damp insulation, and something else underneath, metallic and faintly sour. He pulled out his phone and used the flashlight to search deeper. At first it was all debris, then a glint of something reflective caught his eye. Wait, he muttered. He reached down carefully and pulled out a plastic bag, sealed and partially wrapped in an old towel. Inside, stained and rumpled, was a military uniform jacket. Sam held it up and shone the light across the chest. The name tape read, Garrison. Victor exhaled sharply. Dear God. There were bloodstains across the front, dark and dried but unmistakable. This could place Garrison at the scene, Sam whispered. If that blood matches Colonel Westfield's. It's not just evidence, Foster said, voice tight. It's motive. Garrison had everything to lose if Westfield turned on him. Maya discovered the fraud, Westfield was probably about to confess, and Garrison panicked. Sam took a step back. We can't just take this, though. Chain of custody would be broken. It wouldn't hold up in court. Then we call someone who can collect it the right way, Victor said. Someone outside Garrison's reach. Before anyone could speak, a noise echoed from behind the storage shed, gravel crunching under boots. Atlas snapped to attention, ears back, growling low in his throat. They ducked behind the dumpster just as two silhouettes appeared, walking along the far fence line. One voice muttered, Garrison wants everything cleared out before the Inspector General arrives. What about the Rodriguez appeal? The other asked. It won't go anywhere, the first voice replied with a snort. The judge is a friend of Garrison's. Who's gonna believe a crippled vet with PTSD over a major in uniform? Foster stiffened, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Victor's hands gripped his wheels like a vice. Sam carefully lowered the dumpster lid and ushered them further into the shadows. When the two men disappeared, Victor whispered, we need to move. Now. They exited the yard the way they had come and made their way back to the house in silence, each step heavy with new understanding. Once inside, Foster locked the door and checked the windows while Sam dialed a number from his phone. Victor raised an eyebrow. Who are you calling? I think I know someone who can help, Sam said. If anyone can be trusted, it's her. The call went to voicemail, then rang again. Finally, a woman's voice answered. Ortiz. Special Agent Camila Ortiz? Sam asked quickly. This is Sam Winters. I'm a public defender representing Maya Rodriguez. I have information, evidence, critical to a miscarriage of justice. I need your help. There was a long pause. I'm listening, she said finally. Victor leaned in. Tell her everything. And so he did. The photos, the GPS tracker, the suppressed blood evidence, the USB drive with the stolen funds, and now, the uniform. When he was done, Ortiz was silent for several seconds. This better not be a setup, she finally said. Because if it's true, we're not talking about corruption. We're talking about conspiracy. It's all true, Victor said. Every word. Where are you? She asked. Victor gave the address. Ortiz replied, I'll be there in an hour. Don't speak to anyone. Don't move anything. And if Garrison or any of his people show up before I do, call 911 and pray they answer before it's too late. As the call ended, Atlas finally relaxed, laying his head on Victor's lap. The old soldier stroked his fur and whispered, good boy. Somewhere deep in the gears of the system, the truth had begun to stir. And it all started because one dog never stopped believing in the woman who saved him, the same way he now intended to save her. By the time the doorbell rang again, night had fallen thick and heavy, settling over the quiet street like a warning. Victor sat in his wheelchair at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of black coffee between his hands, though he hadn't taken a sip in over an hour. Sam paced slowly near the living room window, eyes flicking toward the shadows outside. Lieutenant Foster stood at attention near the mantel, as if waiting for orders. And Atlas, always vigilant, lay near the door with his ears perked and eyes fixed. The moment the bell rang, he stood and let out a low, restrained growl, not hostile but wary. Victor set down the mug, wheeled himself toward the door, and opened it without hesitation. Standing on the porch, dressed in plain clothes but carrying the quiet weight of authority, was Special Agent Camila Ortiz. Her eyes took everything in, Victor's guarded stance, Foster's stiff posture, Sam's restless pacing, and finally Atlas, who stepped forward to sniff her hand. She held still, letting the dog inspect her before kneeling and scratching behind his ears. You must be Atlas, she said softly. Maya talked about you in her report. Said you were the only one who never questioned her sanity. Victor stepped back, gesturing her inside. We didn't know who else to call. We needed someone who couldn't be bought. Ortiz crossed the threshold, wiping her boots at the door before stepping into the center of the room. You were right to call. If even half of what you told me is true, we're looking at something that goes far beyond a single conviction. She set her phone on the table and pulled a small recorder from her coat pocket. Start from the beginning. No interruptions. No speculation. Just the facts. They told her everything, each detail unfolding with painful clarity. The GPS tracker, the blood-stained uniform, the hidden USB drive, and the overheard conversation behind the maintenance shed. Ortiz listened without speaking, her expression unreadable, her pen moving steadily across a notepad. When Victor finally finished, the silence that followed was as thick as smoke. Ortiz leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. I've been with CID for 18 years. I've seen cover-ups, corruption, even assassinations dressed up as suicides. But this is something else. If Garrison framed Maya, and then had someone scrub the evidence, we're dealing with a conspiracy that likely involves multiple officers. Sam rubbed his temples. So what do we do? Can you reopen the case? Ortiz shook her head. Not directly. I need physical evidence, admissible and collected properly. I'll need to return to the base, request surveillance logs, chain of custody reports, internal communications. But if what you're saying is true, Garrison already has people inside cleaning up behind him. Atlas suddenly stood, ears up, staring toward the window. A soft noise followed, tires rolling over gravel outside. The lights of a black SUV flared briefly as it came to a slow stop across the street. Victor's voice dropped. They found us. Foster moved to the window and parted the curtain an inch. Same SUV from the hotel, she whispered. They followed me here. Ortiz's expression darkened. That's witness intimidation. It's a federal offense. She turned to Sam. We need to secure the dumpster now. We can't risk them removing or destroying that jacket. Before anyone could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the stillness. It came from the back of the house, something small, deliberate, and fast. Atlas barked violently and took off toward the kitchen. Back door, Victor shouted. They're coming in the back. Ortiz drew her sidearm and moved to the hallway, her voice firm and commanding. Stay behind me. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. A loud thud followed by a sharp yelp erupted from the kitchen. Seconds later, Atlas reappeared dragging a man by the sleeve of his uniform. The man groaned, clutching a bleeding arm. Ortiz stepped forward and aimed her weapon directly at his face. Military police, she demanded. Name and rank. The man grunted through clenched teeth. Corporal Jenkins. MP Division. Ordered to secure potential evidence for an ongoing investigation. Whose orders? Ortiz barked. Major Garrison, he replied, his eyes darting toward the door. Ortiz lowered her weapon slightly but didn't holster it. You've just confessed to breaking and entering, attempted theft of evidence, and implicating a superior officer in obstruction of justice. She turned to Victor. I'll call it in. We're going official now. Within the hour, 2 CID vehicles arrived and took Jenkins into custody. Ortiz's team photographed the uniform, the flash drive, and the fitness tracker. The SUV across the street had disappeared, but base security was placed on alert. Ortiz stood in the kitchen, filling out her final report of the night, her voice quiet but firm. This is just the beginning, she said. We have the uniform, the GPS, the suppressed forensic report, and now a direct attempt to tamper with evidence. That's enough to crack this case open. Victor watched her closely. You believe us now? She glanced down at Atlas, who sat calmly beside her. I've been doing this long enough to know when a story doesn't add up. But I've also learned something else over the years. She looked at Victor. Sometimes justice starts with the person nobody expects, the one who can't speak, but sees everything. Victor reached down and rested a hand on Atlas's head. He's not just a dog, he said softly. He's the only one who never stopped fighting for her. Ortiz nodded, her expression softening. Then we better keep up. Outside, the first rays of dawn were beginning to stain the horizon, and for the first time in weeks, Victor allowed himself to believe. The truth wasn't buried. It was rising. And it had teeth. Victor sat on the couch with his hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles pale against his skin. The house had quieted after the chaos of the night before, but the energy inside still thrummed like an exposed wire. Across from him, Agent Ortiz reviewed the evidence once again. The flash drive containing damning financial records glowed faintly in the laptop's port. Nearby, the plastic evidence bag holding Major Garrison's blood-stained jacket lay on the table, sealed and tagged by CID protocol. Lieutenant Foster stood by the window with arms crossed, her eyes darting to every passing car. Sam, pacing in the hallway, couldn't keep still. And Atlas. He remained the center of gravity, curled beside the couch, his head resting on his front paws, his ears alert even in rest. We've got enough to demand an inquiry, Ortiz said finally, her voice cutting through the tension. But the question isn't whether Garrison is guilty. It's whether we can move fast enough to stop what's coming. Victor turned toward her, his face creased with fatigue and defiance. He's not just cleaning up evidence. He's controlling the entire narrative. And Maya's time is running out. Ortiz nodded grimly. The governor's office isn't going to wait forever. Executions can move quickly under special circumstances, especially when someone influential is pushing from behind the curtain. Sam stopped pacing. So what do we do? If we move too soon, Garrison could destroy everything. But if we wait, his voice trailed off, the unspoken consequence hanging in the air. Before anyone could respond, Atlas stood. He stretched slowly, then walked over to the duffel bag Victor had left beside the couch. He sniffed it again and let out a short bark, one paw nudging the strap. Victor raised an eyebrow. What now, boy? Atlas stared at the door, then looked back at Victor, tail swishing once. He barked again, louder, more insistent. Ortiz narrowed her eyes. He wants to go somewhere. Sam stepped toward the dog. We've been following him for days now. And every time, he's been right. Victor grabbed his coat and checked his chair's brakes. Then we go. No one questioned it. They left the house cautiously, Ortiz in front with her badge ready and her sidearm concealed beneath her coat. Foster flanked Victor on one side, while Sam brought up the rear. Atlas led the group through a different route this time, turning away from the maintenance yard and instead weaving toward the southeast edge of the base. The streets were mostly quiet. Early shift soldiers passed by without paying attention, heads down, routine set. It wasn't until they reached the administrative district that tension began to rise again. Atlas slowed as they approached the personnel records building, a beige concrete structure with narrow windows and a locked metal entrance. Ortiz muttered under her breath, "We can't break in here. Not without a warrant." But Atlas didn't lead them to the front. Instead, he guided them around the back where a narrow maintenance alley offered cover from the road. At the end of the alley, leaning against a locked door and smoking a cigarette, stood a young woman in military fatigues. When she saw them, her eyes widened, but she didn't reach for a weapon. She dropped the cigarette and crushed it under her boot. "Sergeant Willis," Victor said, recognizing her instantly. "Records clerk. You knew Maya, didn't you?" She nodded. "I was hoping you'd come." Sam stepped forward. "You were expecting us?" "Lieutenant Foster told me you might need access to restricted files," Willis said. "I couldn't say anything before. Garrison had me flagged for reassignment when I questioned the classification of Maya's records. He shut me down hard. Ortiz eyed her carefully. You're risking your career, Sergeant. Willis's mouth hardened. My brother came back from Afghanistan with PTSD. The system failed him. I'm not letting it fail Maya, too. She scanned her badge and opened the door, beckoning them inside. They moved swiftly through darkened hallways until they reached a terminal in the back of the building. Willis sat down and typed rapidly, navigating through layers of encrypted access with ease. Ortiz watched over her shoulder. What are we looking for? Anything that connects Garrison to the murder, or suppressed evidence from the original investigation. After a few moments, Willis's fingers slowed. Found something, she said, eyes narrowing. Initial forensic analysis on the murder weapon lists 2 blood types, Westfield's and an unknown sample. But the report submitted to the court lists only one, Westfield's. They altered the forensic record, Sam said, fury rising in his voice. They erased the second person from the evidence. There's more, Willis continued. After Westfield's death, Garrison personally requested custody of the colonel's personal effects. Said it was for an ongoing internal investigation. The request was approved in less than an hour. Victor's voice turned ice cold. He was erasing every trace that could lead back to him. Willis inserted a flash drive into the terminal and began copying files. I'm pulling everything I can find, but we don't have much time. Patrols sweep this building every 40 minutes. Sam leaned in. Grab all classified logs related to Maya's personnel file too. We need to know what else they hid. Atlas, who had been sitting quietly by the door, suddenly stood and turned toward the hallway. His ears twitched. His body tensed. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Willis's eyes widened. We've got company. Someone's coming. She yanked the flash drive out of the terminal and handed it to Sam. Back exit. Now. They slipped out through a side door just as voices echoed from the main hallway. Atlas led them through the shadows again, his movements precise, silent, as though he knew every step. They didn't stop until they were safely inside Victor's house once more. Ortiz plugged the drive into her laptop and scanned the files. This changes everything, she said. Blood evidence that was hidden. Personal effects taken illegally. Direct tampering by Garrison. If we compare this with the audio recording Maya gave Foster. We have enough to get the execution stayed, Victor finished, his voice hopeful for the first time in days. We're getting close, Ortiz said, her eyes scanning the lines of code and reports. But we need to move fast. Garrison won't wait for us to finish. He'll strike before we can bring this to court. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and the sky darkened with a coming storm. But inside, for the first time since Maya was taken away, a sense of momentum had returned. The trail had begun. And nothing, not threats, not lies, not even time, would stop them now. The house had grown darker with the clouds outside, as if the weight of truth was beginning to collapse the ceiling itself. Ortiz sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, the files Sergeant Willis had pulled from the base glowing across the screen. The others gathered around her in silence, the flicker of information the only light in the room besides the slow rise and fall of Atlas's chest where he lay nearby, still on high alert. Every few minutes, his ears would twitch, his eyes darting to the door or window, waiting for something only he seemed to anticipate. Victor leaned forward, scanning the evidence on the screen with eyes that refused to blink. It's all here, he murmured. They scrubbed the second blood sample, redirected the forensic trail, and then buried the report. Ortiz nodded grimly. This proves intentional suppression. Garrison manipulated the chain of custody, deleted digital logs, and redirected physical evidence. The fact that he acquired Westfield's personal effects without going through proper military protocol is a red flag big enough to stop traffic. Sam stepped back, rubbing his temples. So why hasn't anyone stopped him? Why didn't someone speak up earlier? This had to go through multiple layers of clearance. Because fear is a powerful weapon, Foster said from across the room. Garrison didn't just cover his tracks, he made sure everyone along the trail knew what would happen if they got in his way. Careers, pensions, even personal threats. People looked the other way to protect themselves. Victor's voice was low, but it cut through the room like a blade. And while they protected themselves, they let my daughter rot in a cell waiting to die. No one answered. There was nothing to say. Ortiz closed the laptop and stood. We're close. Too close for Garrison's comfort. If he knows we have this information, he'll accelerate whatever plan he has. We need to move carefully, but fast. Just then, Atlas lifted his head and let out a single sharp bark, then walked to the front window and stared through the blinds. Victor wheeled toward him and peered outside. A black SUV idled across the street, again. Same tinted windows. Same unmarked plates. They're watching us, Victor said. Same car from last night. Ortiz pulled her weapon from its holster and walked to the window. They're not just watching anymore. They're making sure we know they're watching. Foster's voice dropped. That's intimidation. We need to report this to base security. Ortiz's jaw tightened. No. Base security answers to command, and Garrison is still in command. If we file a complaint, it'll get buried before it's even read. We need someone outside the chain. Sam glanced at Victor. Someone with authority, integrity, and nothing to lose. Victor looked down at Atlas and nodded slowly. I know just the person. Someone who served with me in Iraq. He's in the Inspector General's office now. Clean record, hated bureaucracy even more than I did. If anyone will take this seriously, it's him. Ortiz raised an eyebrow. You trust him? With my life, Victor said. Then call him, Ortiz said. We don't have time to second guess. If we're going to stop this from reaching Maya's execution, we need a formal investigation launched today. Victor rolled to the landline on the wall and dialed a number from memory. The phone rang once, twice, then a gruff voice answered. Inspector Godfrey. Victor straightened. It's Rodriguez. Victor. There was a pause. Well, I'll be damned. Been a long time, Sarge. I don't have time for small talk, Godfrey. I've got something that's going to land on your desk whether you like it or not. But I need to know, are you still the man I knew, or did you start wearing stars and looking the other way? I'm still me, Godfrey replied. What the hell's going on? Victor explained everything in sharp, clipped sentences, never raising his voice but never softening the blow. When he finished, there was a long silence on the line. You realize what you're saying, right? Godfrey said slowly. This isn't just one man's career. This is systemic. I know exactly what I'm saying, Victor answered. And if we don't act, a decorated black combat vet is going to be executed for a murder she didn't commit. There was another pause. Then, I'll be there in 2 hours. Don't go anywhere. Don't trust anyone. And if anyone knocks that you didn't call, don't open the damn door. Victor hung up and turned to the others. He's coming. And if Godfrey comes, he's bringing the whole damn rulebook with him. Ortiz exhaled. That's what we need. A formal investigation will give us legal cover to stop the execution and put Garrison in a cage where he belongs. Outside, the SUV pulled away slowly, vanishing down the street like smoke. But the air inside the house remained heavy. There was no celebration, no relief. Only resolve. Suddenly, Atlas stood again, rigid. His ears pinned back. His nose lifted into the air. He growled low in his throat, a sound Victor hadn't heard since Kandahar. A sound that meant danger was no longer coming, it was already here. Ortiz instinctively stepped to the side of the window, gun still in hand. What is it? Victor narrowed his eyes. He smells something. Then a sound broke through the silence. A subtle metallic click. The front doorknob slowly turned. Foster was already moving, reaching for the side drawer and drawing a concealed pistol. Sam froze. Ortiz raised her voice without shouting. Identify yourself now. No response. Atlas lunged, barking furiously, claws scraping across the hardwood as he charged toward the door. Victor shouted, "Atlas, wait!" But it was too late. The door flew open, and the man standing on the porch barely had time to raise his hands before Atlas slammed into him, knocking him flat onto the concrete. Ortiz was outside in a heartbeat, gun trained. Name: Specialist Reyes. I'm with Base Logistics, he cried, flat on his back with Atlas's teeth inches from his throat. I was told to deliver a message from Major Garrison. Victor stepped onto the porch behind them. What message? Reyes swallowed. That you should stop digging. Or Maya Rodriguez won't make it to the execution chamber. Ortiz's jaw clenched. You just made my job a whole lot easier. She yanked the specialist to his feet, cuffed him with zip ties from her belt, and turned to Victor. We're past the warning stage. Victor didn't respond. He looked down at Atlas, who now sat at attention beside the subdued soldier, tail still and eyes blazing. We're not stopping, Victor said quietly. Not now. Not ever. Inside the house, the clock ticked toward morning. Every second mattered now. Every second was a chance to tear down the lies. And every second brought them closer to justice. 2 hours later, the black sedan pulled up in front of Victor's house, the engine still rumbling as if unwilling to go quiet in a neighborhood where too many truths had been buried. The man who stepped out moved with a kind of weary purpose. Broad-shouldered, stocky, with a face lined by both time and fury, Inspector Jeremiah Godfrey didn't knock. He walked straight to the door and opened it without asking, his badge already in hand. Rodriguez, he barked, stepping into the living room, if half of what you told me is true, then I just drove through a damn war zone of lies. Victor wheeled out to greet him, the two men locking eyes for a moment. Old battle scars passed silently between them, not on their skin, but in how they stood, how they carried years of betrayal and loyalty in equal measure. Godfrey glanced around the room, taking in the faces, Ortiz standing like a sentinel, Sam gripping a thick folder of evidence, Foster stiff-backed with silent resolve, and Atlas seated beside Victor, gaze calm but vigilant. So this is the squad, he muttered, setting down his briefcase. All right. Let's get to work. Ortiz stepped forward and handed him the flash drive containing the suppressed forensic reports and falsified documents. Start here, she said. Then we'll show you the jacket, the recording, and everything else. Godfrey plugged the drive into his government-issued laptop, and for several minutes, the room was filled only with the hum of the machine and the occasional click of his mouse. As he read through emails, blood test logs, and personnel access requests, his lips tightened into a hard line. He didn't speak until he reached the altered forensic report. Jesus, he muttered. They didn't even try to be subtle. This is straight-up evidence tampering. Victor leaned forward. We have Maya's GPS tracker from that morning. She wasn't anywhere near Westfield's house. We have her shoes, clean, no gravel from his driveway. And that blood-stained uniform? Garrison's. Found behind the maintenance shed, in a sealed bag. Atlas led us to it. Godfrey raised an eyebrow. The dog? Ortiz nodded. He's been the most reliable tracker in this whole mess. Foster added quietly, he was trained to sense distress. Maya's distress. He hasn't stopped trying to find the truth since the moment she was taken. Godfrey gave Atlas a long look, as if considering something not easily said aloud, then returned his attention to the screen. I'm submitting a request for an emergency stay of execution. This should be more than enough to freeze the process while we investigate. But we need to move fast. Victor's voice was low. The governor's under pressure. Garrison's playing every card he's got. I'll call in a favor, Godfrey said. A federal judge I served with in Kabul. She won't ignore what's on this drive. Sam stepped forward, worry etched into every line of his face. And Maya? Can we get her moved? Somewhere safe. Somewhere out of Garrison's reach? Godfrey shook his head. Not yet. But we can get a guard rotation change. Once the stay goes through, I'll have her transferred under federal supervision. Until then, we keep building the case. Atlas suddenly stood and moved to the back of the room, sniffing at Maya's old duffel bag again. He pawed at it, then looked back at Victor, barking once. Victor frowned. We already checked that bag. Sam opened it again, spreading out the contents. Same running gear, tracker, training log, weight. He held the bag up and felt along the inside lining. His fingers paused, then gripped something thin and hard. There's a slit, he said. Something's tucked in the fabric. He pulled out a micro SD card, no larger than a fingernail. She must have hidden this as a backup. Ortiz took it and inserted it into her laptop. A single encrypted file appeared, locked behind a passcode. Foster stepped closer. She told me she was being followed. She didn't trust her devices anymore. She might have hidden something critical on this. Godfrey's voice was tight. Can you crack it? Ortiz frowned. Not without the passcode. I might know someone who can, Foster said suddenly. A communications tech from my unit. She's off-grid, but she owes Maya everything. If I call her in, she'll come. Victor looked at the clock. Then call her. We don't have days. We don't even have hours. As Foster stepped outside to make the call, Atlas remained beside the bag, tail twitching, body tense. He kept glancing between the door and the laptop, like he knew something was missing. Victor leaned down and stroked his fur. You're trying to tell us something, aren't you? Ortiz watched the dog, her skepticism softening. He hasn't been wrong yet. Sam looked at Godfrey. So what's the plan? What do we do until the tech gets here? Godfrey stood, closing his laptop. We secure everything. We double back every piece of evidence, we get witnesses sworn in, and we prepare for pushback. Garrison's not just desperate, he's cornered. That makes him dangerous. Foster re-entered the house, phone still in hand. She's on her way. Said she'd bring a field kit and get to work the moment she's here. But she warned me, if Garrison knows we're this close, he'll make a move. Probably tonight. Victor stared at the ceiling as if he could see time slipping through the cracks. Then we need to be ready. Godfrey moved toward the door and peered out through the curtains. We've got maybe one shot at this. If the wrong people get wind of this card, this whole case could disappear. Ortiz walked over to Victor. If you need to hide anything, now's the time. Victor looked down at Atlas, who stood up and moved to the front door, then back to the bag again. He barked twice, sharply. Godfrey raised an eyebrow. What's with him now? Victor's eyes narrowed. He wants to go. Sam blinked. Go where? Victor didn't hesitate. Wherever she told him to go if something ever happened. Ortiz frowned. You're suggesting we follow a dog on instinct? Victor looked up, his voice calm but unwavering. That dog is the only reason Maya's still alive. If he wants to lead us somewhere, we follow. The house went silent for a long breath. Then Ortiz nodded. Then let's move. The wind swept in low gusts through the darkened corridors of Fort Braden's administrative wing, rustling the old flags that hung above the side entrances like forgotten banners of a fading empire. It was just past midnight when Victor, Ortiz, Sam, and Foster followed close behind Atlas, whose paws made no sound as he guided them through an empty service corridor along the edge of the base. The only light came from the yellow flicker of overhead maintenance bulbs, one of which buzzed faintly as it struggled to stay alive. Every step was calculated. Every breath, measured. No one spoke. The gravity of what they were walking into pressed heavily on their shoulders. Atlas paused at the corner where a narrow stairwell led to the sublevel record storage. Victor had only been down there once during his service years, and the memory was vague but unsettling, rows of locked cabinets, old personnel files, and digital archives kept offline for security purposes. Atlas barked once, then descended the stairs without hesitation. Ortiz raised her weapon, her eyes scanning every angle as she followed, her voice low. "If there's anything buried in this place, this is where it'll be." When they reached the bottom, the air shifted. It was cooler here, dry and sterile. A faint hum filled the silence, like the sound of an old generator vibrating deep within the walls. Atlas led them to a locked door marked, "Classified Access, Level 3 Clearance Required." He sat beside it and stared, waiting. Sam turned to Foster. "This place, it wasn't on the schematics we reviewed." Foster nodded. "That's because it wasn't meant to be. These sublevel rooms are often repurposed for off-the-record investigations, internal inquiries, even informal tribunals. If Maya ever recorded anything down here, it won't be logged." Victor stared at the access panel, the numbers glowing softly in the dark. "Can we get in?" Foster pulled a keycard from her jacket and swiped it. The red light blinked once, then turned green with a quiet beep. The door clicked open. Inside, the room was colder still. Shelves lined the walls, filled with hard drives, labeled boxes, and laminated files. A large terminal sat in the center, dusty and untouched. Ortiz moved in first, her light sweeping across the surfaces. "Clear," she whispered. "But this place hasn't been accessed in weeks." Sam approached the terminal and brushed off a thick layer of dust. "This is a data archive. If Maya backed up any footage or audio logs, this is where she'd hide it." He powered on the machine, the screen flickering to life with a low whine. "No network connection. Everything's local." Atlas moved toward a cabinet in the corner, sniffed along the bottom, then sat again. Foster opened the drawer and pulled out a thick folder with a black binder clip. She opened it, revealing printed transcripts. Her breath caught. This is a conversation log. Between Maya and Colonel Westfield." Ortiz moved to her side, scanning the first page. She documented their meeting. Victor took the folder and began to read aloud, his voice low but steady. "I have the documents, Colonel. I know about the misappropriated funds. The forged veteran rehab approvals. I know you and Garrison have been redirecting money." He turned the page. "You have no proof that would stand up in court, Captain. And with your mental health file, no one will believe you." Another page. "Then I'll go public. I'll take it to the Inspector General. If anything happens to me, I've left backups. You will not silence me, sir." Sam's hands trembled slightly as he clicked through the terminal's folders. He stopped at one labeled Redstone. "She used code names," he muttered. "This one's encrypted but labeled Meeting, 48 hours before." He opened it, and the room filled with Maya's voice, calm and clipped, speaking into a handheld recorder. "I'm documenting this as a safeguard. If this gets out, if I disappear, I want it known I tried to follow the chain of command. I tried to report it the right way. Colonel Westfield and Major Garrison are orchestrating a scam that's diverting millions away from injured veterans. And when I questioned it, they threatened me. I'm not afraid anymore. If I have to be the one who burns for this, so be it. But I won't be silent." The audio ended with a faint click, followed by silence that held the weight of finality. Ortiz stepped back, her expression unreadable. "This is it. This is the nail. Between the blood evidence, the altered forensic report, the GPS tracker, and this audio log, we have a complete picture. Victor nodded slowly. She tried to stop them. She knew what would happen. She was ready to die for it. Foster's voice shook. And they tried to make her look like a traitor. A broken soldier lashing out. But she was the only one still fighting the right war. Sam copied the files onto a new encrypted drive, then shut the system down. We need to get this to Godfrey immediately. But before they could move, Ortiz raised a hand. Wait. Listen. Footsteps. Heavy. Measured. Approaching from the stairwell above. Atlas growled low and backed into the shadows, body rigid. Victor wheeled back into the corner, Foster raising her weapon. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A keycard swipe. A pause. Another swipe. Then silence. Ortiz pointed to the side exit. Go. Now. They slipped through the emergency hatch into a narrow service tunnel that fed into the central boiler room. Behind them, the door creaked open, and boots struck the floor with a rhythm that echoed like a death drum. They didn't wait to see who entered. Ortiz led the way, guiding them through the darkened corridors until they emerged into the open air behind the main barracks. The night was thick with fog, the base eerily quiet. Victor clutched the flash drive in his hand as if it held Maya's very life. We've got everything now, he said. The proof. The motive. The cover-up. Sam nodded. Then let's end this. Atlas looked up at them, eyes shining in the moonlight. They hadn't just uncovered shadows. They were ready to bring them into the light. Back at Victor's house, the living room buzzed with tension as the group returned with the newly recovered evidence. The silence between them was not from exhaustion but from the weight of what they now carried. Sam carefully inserted the flash drive into Ortiz's laptop, his fingers stiff with urgency. The others gathered around the screen while Atlas lay nearby, his breathing shallow and slow, but his eyes alert and watching every movement. On the screen, the copied files from the sublevel terminal appeared one by one. Sam clicked open the folder labeled Redstone, and the audio recording they'd already heard played again. This time, though, they let it finish in full, sitting in the darkened room like a jury listening to a verdict being passed down from a woman whose courage had outlived her own freedom. When the final words echoed out, Maya's voice saying, "I won't be silent." No one spoke for a long time. Then Godfrey leaned forward and whispered, "She laid it all out. And they buried her for it." He stood up, his heavy frame casting a shadow across the wall. "This is enough to blow the whole case open. I'm going to contact the federal court and request an emergency stay. We'll move to transfer Maya to federal custody under protection. Then we start unsealing everything." Victor looked over at him. "You'd better hurry. Garrison already knows we're too close. He sent someone to my front porch last night to deliver a threat. This won't end with intimidation." Godfrey nodded. "I've dealt with men like him before. When they see the walls closing in, they try to burn the whole house down on their way out." Ortiz turned back to the laptop. "There's still the encrypted microSD card from Maya's duffel bag. If there's something on there that she didn't trust to upload anywhere else, it could be explosive." Foster checked her phone. "My tech contact's en route. She should be here in 20 minutes. She's bringing decryption tools." Sam leaned back in his chair. "Every time we think we've uncovered everything, we find another layer." Victor gave a tired smile. "That's because Maya was smart. Smarter than all of them. She didn't just collect evidence. She planted it like breadcrumbs. She knew no one would listen to her, so she made sure someone would listen after." Just then, the lights in the house flickered, then went out entirely. The sudden darkness fell like a curtain, followed by an eerie, mechanical stillness as the refrigerator, fans, and electronics all shut down. Everyone froze. Ortiz immediately drew her sidearm. "Stay calm," she said. "That's not a coincidence." Atlas was already on his feet, a deep growl rising in his throat. He moved to the front door, sniffed at the bottom, then turned and bolted to the rear hallway. Victor rolled after him, his voice low. "What is it, boy?" Ortiz glanced out the front window. "We've got company." She dropped to one knee, motioning for everyone to stay low. 3 men. Moving fast. Tactical gear. Godfrey unholstered his weapon. "They're here for the evidence. Probably think we haven't made the upload yet." Sam's voice shook. "But we have, right? You sent the data to the federal court?" Godfrey nodded. "It's in the system, but I haven't received confirmation of the stay yet. We need to hold out until then." A crash came from the back of the house, glass shattering, wood splintering. Atlas erupted in a frenzy of barks, his body lunging toward the kitchen. Ortiz moved fast, directing everyone behind the couch and taking cover herself by the hallway entrance. The lights remained out, plunging everything into a wavering blur of moonlight and shadows. Then, from the kitchen, a scream. A man stumbled into view, clutching his forearm, blood trailing from a savage bite mark. Atlas followed at his heels, snarling and snapping, hurting the intruder backward. The man fell into the coffee table and tried to scramble to his feet, but Ortiz was already there, her weapon aimed dead center. On the floor. "Hands where I can see them." The man froze, panting, his hands slick with blood. "I'm military police. You don't understand." Godfrey stepped forward. "Who sent you?" The man's eyes darted between the barrel of the gun and the faces around him. "Major Garrison. He said to retrieve any classified evidence, secure the perimeter, that it was a threat to base security." Ortiz's face darkened. "Breaking and entering, interfering with a federal investigation, and lying under oath. That's a hell of a list you're building." Atlas growled low, still watching the man as if daring him to move. Godfrey zip-tied the intruder's hands and dragged him to a corner of the room. Ortiz turned to Victor. "You said Maya left layers. If there's one more, we need to find it now." Victor looked at the duffel bag again. He rolled over and emptied its contents once more onto the floor, her running clothes, dog treats, old campaign ribbons, spare prosthetic parts. He ran his hand along the inside again. Then he paused. "There's something here." He pulled at the inner lining until it separated slightly, revealing a hidden compartment. Nestled inside was a second microSD card, smaller than the first. Ortiz took it carefully, holding it up to the light. This wasn't part of the main stash. She hid it deeper. Whatever's on here, it's what she thought was too dangerous to even let Foster carry. Foster stared at the card. "She never told me about a second one." The front door creaked again. Everyone spun around, weapons raised. But it wasn't another intruder, it was a woman in a black hoodie, her hair pulled back tight, a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She raised her hands. "Name's Rain. Foster sent me. I'm here to crack your encryption." Ortiz exhaled. "You're late. I had to dodge 2 checkpoints and a guy following me in a gray truck. I'm not late. I'm lucky." Rain walked to the table, opened her laptop, and pulled out a portable drive adapter. Let's see what Maya thought was too hot to store anywhere else. As she inserted the microSD, Victor turned to Atlas, who had returned to his spot at the base of the couch. He patted the dog's head gently. "You were right, boy." Again. The screen flashed once. Then a new file appeared. It was labeled only, "Final Message." Ortiz whispered, Maya knew this day would come. Rain clicked to open it. And the room held its breath as Maya's last secret finally stepped into the light. The file began to play, and silence fell over the room as Maya's voice returned once more, not with the tension of her other recordings, but with a strange calmness, the kind that comes only when a person knows they're walking into fire. "If you're hearing this," Maya said, her voice steady and clear, "then something's gone wrong. I've either been silenced or ignored, and the only thing left is truth. Not the kind you find in courtrooms or polished statements. The real kind. The kind that bleeds." Her words paused, replaced by the rustling of paper. Then she continued. "Garrison was the one pulling the strings. Westfield was the hammer, but Garrison wielded him. The money they stole could have built hospitals for veterans, funded therapy, prosthetics, families. Instead, it bought silence. Promotions. Luxury. And when I got too close, Westfield got scared. He called me in, told me to back off. Said I was paranoid. Said nobody would believe me because of my file, because I'm black, female, and broken. He said no one wants a whistleblower with a limp." Her voice caught slightly, then regained its strength. "So I recorded that meeting. And I recorded this one, too. Just in case. Because the truth has a habit of dying quietly in corners where no one looks. But not this time." The audio clicked off, and the screen displayed a folder titled Coordinates. Inside, a GPS tag appeared, latitude and longitude, marked deep inside the base in a restricted area near the old communications outpost. Victor leaned forward. "That's the northwest perimeter. They used to run drone training there back in the day." Ortiz glanced at Foster. "Is that outpost still operational?" "No. Shut down 5 years ago. Too much cost, not enough activity. But the buildings are still there. Some storage. A few old comms lockers." Rain scanned the data. The file's metadata shows it was last accessed 2 days before Westfield died. She must have hidden something there. Maybe something too large to move or upload. Victor turned to Atlas, who was already standing again, his tail swaying slightly. "You ready, boy?" Atlas responded with a soft woof and padded to the door. Ortiz holstered her weapon. "Let's go." The drive across the base was short but tense. Ortiz had called in an unofficial clearance using her federal badge, but they knew it wouldn't hold forever. Godfrey remained at the house to upload everything they had to federal servers and prepare for the court filing. As the truck bumped along the dirt road toward the abandoned outpost, the headlights cut through layers of fog that clung to the buildings like ghosts refusing to leave. The facility had once been a small hub of strategic operations, with steel buildings painted in drab olive tones, now faded and chipped. The fences were still intact, though the gate hung open, swaying gently in the breeze. They parked near the edge, stepping out into silence. Atlas moved first, nose to the ground, moving with purpose. He led them past a storage bunker, across a broken path, and toward the comms building at the far end of the lot. A sign on the rusted door read, "Authorized personnel only." Foster pulled out a crowbar from the truck bed and pried it open. The metal groaned but gave way. Inside, dust floated in columns of moonlight. Racks of obsolete equipment lined the walls, servers, patch panels, tangled cords like abandoned veins in a dead body. But Atlas wasn't interested in the machines. He went straight to a tall gray locker in the back corner and began to paw at its base. Victor stepped forward and knelt beside him. "What do you smell, boy?" Ortiz and Sam joined him as Foster pulled the locker door open. It was empty, save for a false panel at the bottom. Victor felt along the edge and popped it open, revealing a black plastic bag tucked into the hollow space. He pulled it out slowly, his hands trembling. Inside was a small hard drive and a manila envelope marked with Maya's handwriting, "Final records, unedited." Sam opened the envelope and stared. Inside were printed financial documents, contracts, shell companies, signatures, and forged grant applications. Foster examined the header. These weren't just diverted funds. They funneled money through fake nonprofits and pocketed the grants. Some of this was tied to mental health programs, suicide prevention. This was blood money. Ortiz connected the hard drive to her portable tablet. As the files loaded, she cursed under her breath. They recorded everything. Emails between Garrison and Westfield, voice memos, payout schedules. Names of complicit officers. This isn't just the nail in the coffin. It's the whole damn grave. Sam stared in disbelief. She brought it all here. Not because she was hiding. Because she wanted someone to find it when it was too late to destroy. Victor's voice was low. She trusted that someone would keep following. Atlas barked twice and moved toward the door. Then suddenly, he froze. Ortiz's head snapped up. Movement. Outside. They ducked behind the server racks as two headlights lit up the yard. Another vehicle had arrived, unmarked, dark windows, moving slow. Ortiz peered through a crack in the door. It's Garrison's SUV. He's here. Foster whispered, he must have tracked the GPS or flagged the file's metadata. We triggered something. Ortiz turned to Victor. We need to split. You and Sam take the evidence. I'll lead him away. Victor's face tightened. I'm not leaving you behind. You're not, she said. You're finishing what Maya started. That drive has to make it to Godfrey. If we lose that, everything dies. Victor nodded once, then turned to Atlas. Take us home, boy. Fast. They slipped out the back exit as Garrison's SUV came to a stop in the front lot. Ortiz moved forward, alone, drawing her weapon, her badge clipped to her belt like a final line of protection. Victor and Sam ran as fast as Victor's wheels would allow, Atlas guiding them around the compound and back toward the road where they'd parked. They made it to the truck and peeled away into the darkness. As the facility faded behind them, the sound of gunfire cracked through the night, short, sharp bursts that echoed against steel walls and the emptiness of the base. Sam gripped the wheel tighter. She'll be okay, right? Victor didn't answer. He just held the hard drive to his chest, his other hand resting on Atlas's head as they disappeared down the road. Maya's truth was in their hands now. And they were running with the wind. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon, but its promise hung in the air, a faint golden sheen on the edge of night as Victor and Sam pulled into the driveway. The house sat quiet and still, like it had held its breath in their absence. They jumped out of the truck, Atlas leaping down first, already scanning the street with instinctual precision. Victor clutched the hard drive to his chest as Sam rushed ahead and unlocked the front door. As soon as they stepped inside, they found Godfrey waiting at the dining table, surrounded by files, maps, and a laptop still glowing from activity. His expression tightened when he saw their faces. "Where's Ortiz?" he asked. Sam hesitated before speaking. "She stayed behind. Garrison showed up. She led him away so we could get out with this." He placed the hard drive on the table like it was made of glass. Godfrey stood and stared at it for a moment before plugging it into his computer. The screen lit up with folder after folder, evidence of crimes layered in spreadsheets, voice messages, signed authorizations, and forged expense reports. His fingers moved quickly, scanning, opening, sorting. Then he stopped. "Here," he said. "This folder, Operation Pathstone. This is the root of it. The command-level approval for fund diversion. It's signed by Garrison. He didn't just authorize the payments. He designed the entire shell." Victor watched him with weary eyes. "We need that stay. We need Maya out of that prison before he tries to silence her for good." Godfrey nodded. "I already sent the first wave to the U.S. District Court. If we send this now, they'll have no choice but to act. With this much fraud and suppressed evidence, no judge will allow that execution to go forward. Before he could begin uploading, Atlas suddenly rose and padded to the window. A low growl escaped his throat, then grew louder. Victor followed his gaze. The black SUV was back. Same tinted windows. Same unmarked plates. Parked across the street, angled like a predator watching its prey. Sam's voice cracked. They've been circling for hours. I saw them earlier before we left for the base. Godfrey walked to the window and stared for a long moment. That's not surveillance. That's intimidation. And it means they know we have the final piece. Victor turned away and wheeled himself to Maya's duffel bag. He unzipped it and began pulling out supplies, her service medal, her photo from deployment, even the old prayer book she used to carry. Atlas watched him, tail still, head tilted. She kept everything ready, Victor murmured. Like she knew it'd come to this. Godfrey returned to the table. We're uploading now. Once the evidence hits the federal docket, it becomes a matter of record. They can't erase it once it's live. I'm also forwarding it to the Inspector General's office, 3 national reporters, and 2 congressional oversight staffers. If something happens to any of us, it won't end the story. Sam paced by the fireplace, tension pouring off him in waves. Do we have any word from Ortiz? Foster stepped into the room from the back hallway where she'd been monitoring the comms line. Nothing yet. But she's still pinging from her tracking app. She's alive. Victor closed his eyes for a moment, just long enough to gather strength. Then we hold this line until she comes back. Just then, the lights flickered again. Then died. Everything went black. Godfrey cursed and slammed his laptop shut. Backup power? Sam shook his head. This is a residential block. No generator. Foster pulled her sidearm. They're coming. Atlas was already at the back door, barking in a frenzy. Victor grabbed the hard drive and slipped it into a small weatherproof pouch. He looked down at the dog and spoke low and clear. It's time again, boy. Sam's eyes widened. You're not serious. Victor nodded. Maya trained Atlas for emergencies. She taught him to deliver messages. Evidence. She even drilled routes with him, routes to people she trusted. Godfrey stepped forward. Where would he go? To General Winters, Victor replied. She said if anything ever happened, if no one else believed her, the general would. Foster hesitated, then slowly nodded. He's the only commander on this base with authority high enough to override garrison. And he hates corruption. Godfrey took the pouch, sealed it, and handed it to Victor. Victor attached it to Atlas's vest with steady hands, tightening the straps as Atlas stood patiently, unwavering. Then he knelt beside the dog and whispered, "Find the general, boy. Just like Maya taught you." Atlas licked Victor's cheek once and backed up, poised to run. "Now," Victor said. They opened the back door just enough, and Atlas shot out like a streak of lightning, disappearing into the shadows before anyone else moved. Seconds later, headlights flared from the street, followed by tires squealing as the black SUV revved forward. Foster slammed the door shut and bolted it. They saw him. Godfrey turned to Victor. "Let's hope they don't catch him." Victor looked out into the dark, heart thudding not with fear, but with fury. They won't. They can chase him all night. But they'll never be able to outrun the truth. And as Atlas ran through the sleeping base, guided by a memory only he and his handler shared, the tide began to shift. Not just for Maya, but for every soldier they tried to silence. Justice wasn't coming. It was already in motion. The windows rattled first. Just a subtle vibration that might have passed for wind if not for the silence that followed. Victor tightened his grip on the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles bone-white in the faint glow of the emergency flashlight. Godfrey stood by the window, peering through the slats with his weapon drawn, shoulders square and eyes cold. Sam crouched beside the front door, holding the laptop case that contained every file they hadn't sent yet. Foster moved like a shadow across the hallway, checking the back entrance where Atlas had disappeared only minutes earlier. The house pulsed with tension, like the air had been cut by a knife and left to bleed. Then the sound came again. A deliberate creak, slow and unmistakable, someone testing the back door. Victor's voice was steady. "They're here." Godfrey motioned toward the front. "Two outside. They're not feds. No uniforms. Civvies in tactical gear." Foster whispered, "We need to hold them off long enough for the evidence to reach Winters." Sam swallowed hard. "What if Atlas doesn't make it?" Victor turned to him, eyes dark. "Then we make sure someone does." The crash came without warning. The back door burst inward with a force that splintered the frame, sending wood shards flying across the kitchen. Foster opened fire immediately, 2 shots punching through the darkness. A voice cursed loudly, followed by the clatter of boots and glass. Sam ducked behind the couch as Godfrey moved like a machine, sweeping the hallway and firing a warning shot into the floor to slow their advance. A man in black charged through the hallway, masked, armed, fast, but Foster was faster. She stepped from the corner and drove her elbow into his face, sending him sprawling across the tiles. He groaned as his weapon clattered away, and she kicked it behind her as she pinned him with her boot. "Stay down or stay unconscious," she hissed. Another figure entered through the shattered back window, landing with a roll and raising a suppressed pistol. But Victor, already positioned near the table, grabbed the fire extinguisher and launched it across the room with all his might. It struck the man's shoulder, throwing him off balance just long enough for Godfrey to shoot the weapon from his hand and tackle him to the ground. Chaos reigned for a full minute, shouting, scuffling, the shattering of glass and the thudding of boots. But the house held. For every inch they lost, they clawed 2 back. Then the front door flew open. A figure stepped into the frame, backlit by the faint streetlight. Tall, rigid, and unmistakable even without a name tag, Major Philip Garrison. He stepped forward with the confidence of a man who'd spent years commanding others and erasing opposition. His uniform was pristine, his pistol held low at his side. He glanced at the 2 subdued men on the floor, then looked around the room, taking in the scene with disgust. "Quite the operation you've got here," he said coolly. "A house full of amateurs, breaking laws and drawing lines they can't defend." Godfrey raised his weapon. "You're trespassing on a federal investigation." Garrison smiled. "That would require a warrant." "I see none. And let's not pretend this little rebellion has any teeth. You're finished. The execution proceeds in 36 hours, and there's nothing in that pathetic flash drive that can stop it." Sam stepped forward. "You don't know what's on that drive." "Oh, I know exactly what's on it," Garrison replied. "Because I wrote it. You think I didn't prepare for this? That I didn't plan 5 steps ahead? Maya Rodriguez was a liability from the moment she stepped into my chain of command. And when liabilities become dangerous, we neutralize them." Foster moved beside Victor, her voice trembling with rage. "She tried to save people. She tried to fix what you broke. She tried to undermine a system that feeds this country its victories," Garrison snapped. "You think I care about paperwork and budgets? I kept this place alive. I built something that works. I don't answer to people like her, or like you." Godfrey took a step forward, gun still raised. "You answer to the Constitution. And you're done, Major. You've committed obstruction, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Your men just invaded a private home with intent to destroy evidence. And the evidence has already been sent." Garrison's face finally cracked. "Just slightly. A twitch in the jaw. A shift in the eyes. You're bluffing. No, Victor said, his voice as cold as stone. We sent the last piece with someone you'll never catch. Garrison turned slowly toward him. You mean that dog? That's your plan? Victor met his gaze without flinching. That dog is smarter than most of the officers you promoted. There was a pause, just long enough to feel like a verdict. Then came the distant sound of sirens. Godfrey smiled. That would be the MPs. We looped them in 20 minutes ago. This conversation's been live-streamed to CID headquarters. They're listening to everything you say. Garrison's hand twitched toward his pistol. Foster raised hers higher. Don't. He hesitated, his face caught between fury and calculation. Then, slowly, he raised both hands, letting the pistol drop to the floor with a hollow clink. You have no idea what you've done, he muttered. Victor leaned forward in his chair, eyes blazing. Yes, I do. I bought my daughter one more day. As Garrison was cuffed by arriving officers, his men were dragged out one by one, faces down, bleeding and beaten. The house was a wreck, glass everywhere, the back door hanging off its hinges, the walls scarred with bullet marks and broken plaster. But they had won. Victor looked down at his hands, still trembling, still curled into fists. Then he looked at Sam, then Godfrey, then Foster. Now, he said softly, we wait. And somewhere out there in the dark, a dog ran toward justice with the last piece of truth strapped to his side and the soul of a soldier guiding every step. The morning broke with a brittle sky, pale and silent, as if even the sun didn't want to be awake for what was coming. Inside the hospital wing of the Central Detention Facility, Maya Rodriguez sat on her narrow cot, back against the wall, hands folded in her lap. Her prison uniform hung loose on her lean frame, and her prosthetic leg sat propped beside the bed, gleaming faintly in the cold fluorescent light. She hadn't slept. She rarely did anymore. Sleep had become a dangerous indulgence, a place where memories clawed back into her consciousness and dragged her through every battlefield, every betrayal, every moment they called her unfit to wear the uniform she'd bled for. A guard knocked once on the doorframe. You have a visitor. Maya raised her eyes slowly. Who? The guard didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, revealing a woman in civilian clothes with pressed slacks and a stiff blazer, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. MS. Rodriguez, I'm Dana Keene from the office of the governor, she said, her voice clipped and bureaucratic. We've been informed that your legal team submitted a new appeal. However, I've been instructed to let you know that your execution date has been moved up. Maya didn't blink. To when? Keene looked down at her clipboard. 72 hours. But due to recent administrative updates, it's now 48. In other words, the clock has started. Maya looked at the wall again, her expression unreadable. Of course it has. Keene shifted awkwardly. You should know that unless your team can present irrefutable new evidence to the federal court within the next 24 hours, the state intends to proceed. Given the gravity of the charges and the profile of the victim, the governor has declared this a priority execution. Maya finally spoke, her voice as steady as steel. He wasn't a victim. He was a thief and a coward. You're just afraid of what happens if people believe me. Keene didn't respond. She simply nodded and turned to leave. The door shut softly behind her, but the message rang louder than gunfire. Across the base, General Winters stood in his office near the window, his arms crossed as he watched a black SUV screech to a halt outside the administration building. Within seconds, 2 soldiers ran out to meet it, confused but alert. Then, through the mist, a dark figure burst forward from the alley and bounded across the lot. It was Atlas. The German shepherd's coat was soaked from the morning dew, and his chest heaved with effort. A pouch was strapped tightly to his vest, and in his eyes burned a singular focus, the mission of a soldier who had run through fire and fear to deliver the last chance his handler might ever have. "Sir," the aide gasped as Winters stepped forward. That's Maya Rodriguez's dog." Winters didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, faster than his age or years in command might suggest. He knelt as Atlas reached him, and the dog stopped immediately, panting, body shaking, but unbroken. Winters unhooked the pouch and unzipped it, revealing the sealed hard drive and a handwritten note tucked alongside it. "To General Winters, if you're reading this, then I failed. But the truth didn't. Protect it. Please. Maya." Winters rose with the drive in hand, his face pale but resolute. "Get me Agent Ortiz. Now." Meanwhile, back at Victor's house, the aftermath of the breach still lingered. Cleanup crews had arrived to photograph the wreckage, while military police finished processing Garrison's men, now in federal custody. Garrison himself was gone, transported under armed escort to an undisclosed holding location. But the urgency hadn't lifted. If anything, it had grown heavier. Foster entered the living room holding a tablet. "We've received confirmation," she said. The drive reached Winters. Atlas made it. Victor closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled. He did it. Godfrey stood by the coffee maker, hands wrapped around a steaming cup, the only warm thing in the room. "Now we need the court to act." Sam scrolled through his phone, jaw tight. "The governor's office is still refusing to acknowledge our submission. They haven't confirmed receipt of the stay request." Victor turned slowly. "They're stalling." "They're more than stalling," Godfrey said. "They're hoping they can push the execution through before public pressure builds. If they keep the story bottled up another 12 hours, it won't matter what we send them." Rain stepped out from the back room, holding her laptop open. "Then we make the story unbottleable." She set the laptop on the table, loaded with a press release, screenshots, and an audio clip of Garrison's own voice threatening Maya. "I've prepped a media drop to every major outlet. Files, audio, transcripts. We release it, there's no going back. Public will explode. Journalists will swarm the courthouse. They won't be able to bury it." Victor stared at her. "Do it." Rain hesitated only once before hitting send. "Done." They watched the progress bar as the files uploaded to mirrored sites, social media platforms, encrypted drops. Within seconds, alerts began popping up on phones. Mentions. Headlines. Veterans execution under fire amidst corruption scandal. Whistleblower evidence emerges in military fraud case. The dog that carried the truth. The house buzzed with motion as phone calls came in. Ortiz returned from base headquarters, bruised but alive. She carried an official court document in her hand, sealed and marked with a federal insignia. Victor wheeled toward her, unable to breathe until she spoke. "It's done," she said. "Emergency stay granted. Maya's execution is suspended indefinitely pending full investigation." The air left Victor's lungs in a rush as he sank into his chair, eyes stinging. Atlas padded up beside him moments later, now washed and bandaged, but proudly upright. "She's not free yet," Ortiz added. "But she's alive. And she's going to stay that way." Victor reached down and hugged Atlas with trembling arms, burying his face into the dog's fur. "She never gave up," he whispered. "And neither did you." Somewhere behind the clouds, the sun finally rose. And so did the truth. Inside the solitary wing of the detention facility, the narrow hallway echoed with the sharp rhythm of boots on tile. 2 guards flanked Maya as they escorted her back from the infirmary, where they had weighed her, measured her blood pressure, and handed her the same thin meal she hadn't touched in 2 days. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of her prosthetic, but because of the slow march of time ticking toward a moment she no longer feared but deeply resented. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the concrete walls that seemed to close tighter each day. Her cell door opened with a mechanical whir, and she stepped inside without a word. The door clanged shut behind her with finality. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, eyes drifting to the small, barred window high above her. A faint square of morning light filtered through, painting the wall in a soft golden hue. She imagined that somewhere out there, Victor was looking at the same sky. Maybe Atlas too. The thought was a small warmth in the growing cold of her reality. She pressed her hand against her chest, right over the dog tag she still wore beneath her uniform, the one etched with her full name and blood type, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and sweat from all those years in Afghanistan. Then, for the first time in days, the door clicked open again. But this time, it wasn't a guard. It was a woman in a sharp blue suit, hair pinned in a tight bun, carrying a red folder. She stepped inside, giving Maya a polite nod before sitting down in the lone metal chair bolted to the floor. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said, her voice professional but not unkind. "I'm Margaret Ellis, federal counsel appointed by the U.S. Court of Appeals. I've been assigned to review your case following new evidence submitted last night." Maya blinked. "So it reached them?" Ellis nodded. "It did. And the impact was immediate. The court has issued an emergency stay of execution. You will not be put to death in 2 days, nor any time soon." Maya exhaled slowly, her body still tense, like she didn't trust the air around her. "What about Garrison?" "Arrested. Held without bail. Multiple charges, including conspiracy to obstruct justice, evidence tampering, and command-level fraud." "And Westfield?" "Deceased. But his connection to the crimes is part of the formal investigation now. His death, and the framing of you, is under review." Maya stared at the floor for a long moment. "I knew they'd come after me. I didn't think they'd do it this cleanly." Ellis softened. "Not clean. Just quiet. There's a difference." Maya looked up slowly. "Victor, did he make it out?" Ellis gave a faint smile. "He did. He and your team handed over the final hard drive. And Atlas. Well, let's just say the media has already dubbed him a national hero." Maya chuckled, a sound dry and rusty in her throat. "He always was." Ellis opened the red folder. Inside were several pages of transcripts, photographs, and official affidavits. She slid them across the small table between them. "We're filing a motion to vacate the conviction, citing prosecutorial misconduct and suppression of exculpatory evidence. We've also filed a civil rights complaint on your behalf. There is a long road ahead, but one thing is clear, you were wronged." Maya picked up one of the pages and scanned it. Her name, her charges, her sentencing, all printed in black ink like a story someone else wrote for her. Then she saw it, an official signature at the bottom of a reversal request. She closed the folder and pushed it back. "They'll come after you," she said softly. "You push this too far, too fast, someone will try to bury it again." Ellis didn't flinch. "That's why it needs to be done in the open. This isn't just about you, Ms. Rodriguez. It's about every veteran who's been cast aside, every woman of color silenced in the ranks, every whistleblower they tried to erase. You didn't just survive, you exposed something they spent years hiding." Maya's eyes grew sharper, the fire returning to her spine. "Then let's make sure it burns in daylight." Ellis stood and gathered the folder. "I'll be back tomorrow with the official vacate motion. Until then, rest. You're going to need your strength." As she left, the door closed behind her gently, not with the jarring clang Maya had grown used to. This time, it sounded like something changing. That afternoon, the television in the prison common room buzzed with news coverage. Guards stopped to watch. Inmates paused their conversations. The story had broken wide open. Footage of General Winters receiving the evidence from Atlas played on a loop, alongside interviews with members of Congress calling for immediate inquiry into military judiciary processes. Victor's face appeared briefly in a photo, his arm wrapped around Atlas, both looking tired but proud. The headlines scrolled beneath it all like marching orders for a nation that had nearly failed one of its own. Back in her cell, Maya sat quietly, watching the square of sunlight move inch by inch across the floor. When a tray of food arrived, she picked up the spoon and took a single bite for the first time in days. It wasn't good, but it meant something. She was still here. Still fighting. Later that night, she heard a soft knock on the wall, 3 short taps, then a pause, then 2 more. A code from the cell next door. She knocked back. Another knock. "Maya," came a whispered voice. "They're talking about you out there. Guard saying you might get released." Maya pressed her hand to the wall. "Not yet," she whispered. "But soon." In the quiet that followed, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Not the kind that floated high and out of reach, but the kind forged in fire and dragged through the dirt. The kind that comes from being broken and still choosing to rise. The kind that says chains can rattle all they want. But they don't last forever. The sun was barely above the horizon when Victor rolled into the makeshift press room at Fort Ardell. A dozen camera crews had already set up, adjusting tripods, running wires, testing microphones. The energy in the room was electric, part outrage, part anticipation. Journalists from every major network were whispering to their producers, flipping through briefing packets that detailed the extraordinary events of the past 72 hours. At the center of the room, a podium stood framed by 2 American flags and a single banner bearing the seal of the Department of Defense. Behind the curtain, Victor sat in silence, his hands resting on his knees, Atlas at his side. The dog had barely left his feet since returning from the mission. Victor looked down at him now and gave his head a small pat. "You did more than most soldiers ever get a chance to do, buddy." Atlas looked up, eyes calm, as if he already knew. A hand touched Victor's shoulder. It was General Winters, dressed not in his usual military formal but in a navy suit with a muted tie. "It's time," he said. "They need to hear it from someone who knew her best." Victor nodded. With effort, he turned his wheelchair toward the stage and began moving forward. As he emerged from behind the curtain, the murmurs ceased. Flashbulbs sparked. The moment his name was announced, the room locked into silence. He reached the podium and adjusted the mic. His voice, when it came, was slow, cracked but unwavering. "My name is Victor Rains. I'm the father of Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez. My daughter is currently sitting in a detention cell, wearing a number instead of the uniform she earned. And I am here because you deserve to know why." He took a breath, eyes sweeping the crowd. Maya was trained to serve her country. She deployed 3 times. She carried wounded soldiers on her back while rockets fell. She stood up when other people ducked. She brought her squad home, piece by piece, even when it broke her in the process. He held up a laminated photo, Maya in uniform, kneeling beside Atlas on the field in Afghanistan, the sun bright behind them. But when she came home and found corruption festering in the very institution she served, she didn't look away. She spoke up. And for that, they tried to erase her. Murmurs spread across the room, reporters scribbling, fingers typing furiously. They told the public she killed a man in cold blood. That she snapped. That she was unstable. But what they didn't tell you was that the man she allegedly killed was extorting funds from a veterans program, skimming benefits meant for the very people Maya fought to protect. They didn't tell you that the investigation was buried by her commanding officer, Major Garrison, because it would expose a decade of embezzlement and abuse. He paused, voice catching. They didn't tell you she was silenced. Drugged. Threatened. Sentenced to die without a fair trial. Victor's eyes were burning now, but he kept going. My daughter isn't just a soldier. She's a truth-teller. A fighter. And she is still in that cell, not because she's guilty, but because she embarrassed powerful people who built their careers on silence and fear. He turned the page in front of him. We have submitted hard evidence. Audio recordings. Financial documents. Testimonies. And thanks to a brave group of men and women, including a dog who crossed a military base with the last piece of proof, Maya's execution has been halted. Reporters leaned in. But that is not justice. That's survival. Justice is her name cleared. Her honors restored. Her freedom returned. And nothing less will do. He stepped back as Winters took his place at the podium. The general cleared his throat and leaned forward. I am General Isaac Winters, commander of the 2nd Defense Oversight Division. Effective immediately, I am ordering a full internal audit of Fort Ardell's judicial and administrative operations. A special commission will be appointed to oversee military justice reform at all regional commands. Major Philip Garrison is in custody, and he will face a court-martial for his crimes. Let me be clear, this is not about one soldier. This is about a culture that has allowed shadows to replace honor. He looked directly into the camera. Maya Rodriguez is a soldier who should be celebrated, not shackled. The room burst into questions. Dozens of voices shouted at once, when will she be released? Will charges be dropped? Is the president aware? But Victor had already turned away from the noise. Backstage, he reached for a bottle of water with trembling hands. Atlas nuzzled his side, sensing the weight that had just passed through him. I don't know if it was enough, Victor whispered. But it's something. Later that day, Maya was escorted out of her solitary cell, this time not by faceless guards but by 2 uniformed federal officers in crisp suits. Ellis waited at the end of the hall with a formal letter in her hand. Maya stepped forward slowly, not daring to speak until Ellis did. You're being transferred to a secure medical facility for full evaluation pending a new hearing, she said. You're not free yet, but the walls are moving. Maya met her eyes. And Garrison? Held. No bond. Federal oversight took jurisdiction after this morning's press conference. Maya gave the smallest nod. Good. As she was led down the corridor, other inmates stared through the bars. Some whispered. Others nodded. One clapped softly against the metal rail, a small gesture of respect that echoed down the corridor like thunder. She didn't smile. Not yet. But she felt something settle in her chest again. Something like dignity. Something like identity. They opened the gates. She stepped into the sunlight, squinting as it washed over her skin like grace. And for the first time in what felt like years, the chains around her name didn't just rattle. They cracked. The black SUV moved steadily through the DC traffic, sirens silenced but lights flashing low blue against the surrounding buildings. Inside, Maya sat in the back seat between 2 federal agents, her wrists unshackled but her posture rigid. The city outside looked unfamiliar, though she'd once been stationed nearby. The buildings had a different glow now, like the world had changed during her absence, or maybe she had. The agents didn't speak except for occasional updates on their radios. The silence suited her. She wasn't ready to talk. Not until she knew this wasn't just another manipulation, another illusion of freedom designed to disguise a deeper prison. They pulled up to the glass-paneled front of a Department of Justice building, where Ellis waited on the steps in a tailored gray suit, her expression grim but focused. She opened the door herself. We're going straight to the secure debriefing suite. The media's already calling this the trial before the trial. You'll be speaking before a bipartisan congressional panel tomorrow. No cameras, but a full record. It's your story now, Maya. And you have one chance to tell it your way. Maya stepped out slowly, eyes scanning the entrance. If this is a trap, tell whoever's behind it to pull the trigger now. Ellis gave a sharp shake of her head. It's not. They wouldn't risk the backlash. You're too public now. That press conference lit a fire they can't contain. Inside, the building hummed with nervous energy. Staffers whispered as Maya passed. A few saluted. One young officer near the elevator simply placed his hand on his heart and nodded with a tight jaw, eyes shining. Maya acknowledged him with a brief look, but her focus remained ahead. When they reached the secure floor, the walls seemed to close in. Not with menace, but with weight, the weight of what needed to be said. The room was stark. A rectangular table, microphones, a screen for exhibits. No flags. No gallery. Just chairs and eyes and the expectation that she would bring truth where so many had tried to bury it. She took a seat across from the committee. 7 individuals, 3 senators, 2 representatives, a federal judge, and a retired general serving as advisor. One by one, they introduced themselves. None of them smiled. The chairperson, a woman with silver hair and a voice like a hammer wrapped in silk, spoke first. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, we are not here to retry your case. We are here to understand how a decorated war veteran could be sentenced to death under sealed proceedings and manipulated evidence. Your file reads like a war novel: combat commendations, unit leadership, 2 surgeries under fire. You were a hero. And then you disappeared. Maya looked up, meeting her gaze without flinching. I didn't disappear. I was erased. There was a long pause. Tell us what happened. Maya began slowly. She told them about Westfield, the man who smiled too easily, who signed off on requisitions that never reached the field, who redirected aid packages meant for recovery hospitals. She told them about the whispers in the command tent, the smirks, the budgets that didn't add up. About the documents she found, the signatures she copied, the day she made the mistake of confronting him in person. She described the threats, the isolation, the night her quarters were searched without a warrant, the sedative slipped into her water bottle before her next fitness evaluation. She spoke without rage but with precision. Every fact came backed by memory and dates. She spoke of the night Westfield died, how she'd been there but hadn't pulled the trigger. How the gun had been placed in her hand after blacking out. How the investigation that followed ignored physical evidence in favor of a pre-written narrative. She ended with a single sentence. They decided I was more useful dead than alive. Silence blanketed the room. Not one member looked away. Not one dared interrupt. The judge leaned forward, fingers interlaced. You were offered a plea deal at one point, correct? Yes, Maya said. 3 years. Medical discharge. Silence. Why did you refuse? Because silence would have killed me faster than prison ever could. The retired general, his chest bearing medals older than Maya herself, cleared his throat. Sergeant Rodriguez, there are some who say this is a case of insubordination wrapped in heroism. That you let personal vendettas cloud your military discipline. She turned to him, her voice low but piercing. And there are some who let medals blind them to rot in the command structure. I didn't pick a fight. I uncovered one. The room remained still for several seconds before the chairwoman finally spoke. You've done your duty today. And this committee has no further questions. As Maya was led from the room, her legs felt both weak and stronger than they'd been in years. The doors closed behind her with a finality that didn't sound like prison, it sounded like release. Outside the building, a crowd had gathered. Veterans, reporters, students. Some held signs. One read "Justice for Maya." Another simply read "Never erased again." As the SUV pulled away, a child near the curb held up a stuffed German shepherd wearing a tiny military vest. Maya watched through the tinted glass, her throat tightening. For once, the weight she carried didn't feel like a burden. Later that night, back in her temporary quarters, Maya sat with Ellis as breaking news ran across every major network. The Justice Department had launched a formal investigation into Fort Ardell's leadership. A Pentagon spokesperson announced a task force to examine similar convictions. And in the most unexpected move of all, the president had issued a statement: no American soldier should fear injustice from the system they swore to defend. Maya Rodriguez's courage is a call we must answer. Maya didn't smile, but something softened in her face. Ellis set down her phone. Tomorrow, we start drafting the exoneration paperwork. But tonight, you should rest. Maya leaned back in the chair. I haven't known rest in years. Ellis glanced at the TV screen, where a photo of Maya in uniform faded into the words "Truth doesn't die in silence." Then maybe, she said gently, it's time you remembered how. Maya stood at the edge of the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C., her eyes fixed on the quiet surface that mirrored the early morning sky. The Capitol stood proudly in the distance, bathed in pale sunlight, its dome gleaming like a silent promise. A cool breeze moved across the water, brushing against her face and rippling the hem of her borrowed civilian coat. She had refused full protection detail that morning. For the first time in years, she wanted to be alone, truly alone, with no guards, no lawyers, no whispered reassurances. Just herself and the weight she'd carried that no tribunal could lift. Beside her, Atlas sat in silent vigilance, his brown eyes scanning the horizon, his presence steady and sure. He hadn't left her side since the transfer from the military facility. Even now, he watched her with the intensity of a soldier still on mission. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her old unit patch. The edges were frayed, colors faded from years of wear. She ran her fingers over the letters, each thread a memory of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. This patch had once meant everything to her. It had been sewn into her armor, clutched in her hand during explosions, kissed before missions. And yet, here she was, standing in the heart of the very country she had sworn to protect, not as a hero, but as a survivor of betrayal from within. The phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Then came a voice behind her. You were always early. Still can't break that habit, huh? She turned slowly. Victor was approaching in his wheelchair, his gray coat buttoned tight against the chill. His eyes, though tired, held a flicker of amusement. Atlas barked once in recognition but remained seated. Maya's lips curved just slightly. Some things never change. He wheeled closer and held out a paper cup of coffee. Black. No sugar. Just the way you liked it in Kandahar. She accepted it and took a sip. The heat burned her tongue, but she didn't flinch. It tasted like memory, like resilience. She stared out at the water again. You know what no one ever tells you about getting your freedom back, she said. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like being handed the broken pieces of yourself and being told to figure out what shape they used to make. Victor didn't answer immediately. He sat still beside her, letting her words settle like ash. She continued. They say I'm free. But I still wake up at night wondering if today is the day they change their minds. I walk through the world knowing the same people who tried to bury me are still out there. Some resigned quietly. Some still have pensions. Some will never be named. And I'm the one who has to carry that. Victor leaned forward slightly. You also carry something they never will. Truth. You walked through fire, Maya. And you came out with the flame still burning in your hands. That scares people like them. She looked down. It scares me too. Victor reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded letter. She opened it, scanning the top line. Offer of full exoneration and reinstatement of rank, Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez. Her breath caught. They want me back, she asked. Victor nodded. They want you to train the next generation of whistleblower protection officers. Build a program around ethics in command. They're offering back pay. Honors reinstated. Medals returned. Maya folded the paper again. And what if I say no? Then you walk. Start fresh. Speak, write, disappear. But if you say yes, you lead from the front. Not as a soldier. As a symbol. She was silent for a long time. I'm not sure I want to be a symbol. I just want to be a person again. Victor placed a hand over hers. Sometimes, the world doesn't let you be just one. A group of tourists passed nearby, whispering and pointing when they recognized her. She caught snippets. That's her, the soldier with the dog, the one they almost executed. She turned away, face hardening. Fame, she realized, was just another kind of uniform, one that didn't fit right and never came off. Later that day, she returned to the Department of Veterans Affairs for a private meeting. The walls were lined with photos of those who had served, men and women in camouflage, faces full of pride and purpose. The director, a quiet man with a limp, greeted her warmly. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, welcome. We've prepared something. She followed him into a side room. Inside, a display case sat covered in a velvet cloth. He pulled it back gently, revealing a medal, her medal, refurbished and set in a handcrafted frame with her name, rank, and the words for valor and integrity beyond the call of duty etched into gold. We've never given this version before, he said. It didn't exist. We made it because of you. Maya stood frozen. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched the glass. Will you accept it? He asked. She nodded, voice hushed. Only if it doesn't erase what happened. Only if it reminds them. He smiled. It will. As she left the building, she looked over her shoulder once at the walls of framed soldiers. Her photo would be there now. But this time, not as a casualty. As a catalyst. That night, Maya returned to a small apartment provided by the department while she transitioned into civilian life. It wasn't much, bare walls, a single lamp, a modest bed, but it was quiet. Safe. She dropped her bag and sat cross-legged on the floor, Atlas beside her, his head resting on her lap. She stared at the blank wall across from her and whispered softly, "Now what?" There was no answer. Just the soft sound of Atlas breathing and the ticking of a second hand on a borrowed clock. Then she stood, walked to her bag, and pulled out a notebook. She opened to the first page and began to write. My name is Maya Rodriguez. I was a soldier. I was betrayed. But I refuse to vanish. This is my story, and I'm the one who gets to tell it now. And as the ink flowed, the weight in her chest began to lift, word by word, as the uniform finally came off and something new took its place. The auditorium was silent as Maya stepped onto the stage, the sound of her boots echoing softly across the wooden floor. Rows of dignitaries, veterans, students, and survivors of military misconduct filled the room, each pair of eyes fixed on her with a mix of reverence and curiosity. The American flag hung above the podium, but to Maya, it didn't feel like a backdrop. It felt like a question. Would the country she fought for now fight for her, and for others like her? She had worn the uniform with pride, then had it ripped from her along with her reputation. Today, she would speak not as a soldier under orders, but as a free woman who had dared to disobey for what was right. A gentle murmur rolled across the audience as General Winters walked to the edge of the stage. He carried a dark blue box in both hands and looked at Maya with eyes that held no pity, only respect. Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, he began, we gather here today not to restore your honor. You never lost it. We gather because this country is finally ready to admit it failed you. He opened the box and held up the medal. It was unlike any military decoration Maya had ever seen. Its center bore a phoenix rising from a shattered chain, surrounded by 13 stars. Above it, the words, Truth in Service. It gleamed in the light like something forged not from metal, but from everything she had endured. This medal, the general said, was created in your name. It will be awarded to future service members who demonstrate integrity and courage in the face of institutional failure. You are the first recipient. But I promise you, you will not be the last. He stepped forward and pinned the metal above her heart. The moment his hand withdrew, the room erupted in applause, not the polite clapping of a formal event, but the thunderous response of a crowd that had held its breath for far too long. Maya stood still, her back straight, her chin high, but her hands trembled. Not out of fear. Out of something deeper. Relief. Vindication. And the slow realization that everything she had lost could not compare to what this moment meant. When the noise faded, she stepped to the microphone. Her voice, though soft, carried to the back of the hall. I never thought I would see this day. I never thought I'd stand here with my name spoken not in accusation, but in gratitude. But here I am. Not because I am stronger than others who came before me, but because I had a father who believed, a dog who carried proof, and a country that, when pushed hard enough, still remembers how to be just. She paused, letting that truth settle over the crowd. I was imprisoned for telling the truth. But the truth doesn't die in a prison cell. It waits. It finds the cracks. And when it breaks through, it burns. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. But Maya wasn't speaking for them. She was speaking for the women she met in that concrete cell. The veterans who called her in secret to say, "Me too." The ones whose names never made the news, who were still waiting in silence. She continued. We say no one is above the law, but that only matters if we also say no one is beneath protection. Justice is not just the verdict, it's the process. And the process has to change. Let this medal not be an end but a beginning. She stepped back as the audience rose to their feet. General Winters extended a hand. She shook it, but her eyes were already moving across the sea of faces, searching for her father. Victor sat in the front row, tears visible on his cheeks, his hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair. Beside him, Atlas lay quietly, wearing his own special harness adorned with a small medal. The crowd began chanting softly. Maya. 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 After the ceremony, in a quiet room away from the spotlight, Maya sat with Victor and Ellis. A tray of untouched sandwiches sat between them. Ellis finally broke the silence. The committee wants to know if you'll serve on the Military Ethics Reform Board. You'd have full authority to shape training, oversight, and accountability systems. It's a multi-year commitment. Maya looked at her father. He gave a small nod. If they're giving you the steering wheel, you better drive. She exhaled slowly. I'll do it. But I'm doing it my way. Real protections. Real reporting lines. And zero tolerance for command-level cover-ups. If they want a face for this program, they're going to get the whole story, scars and all. Ellis smiled. That's exactly what they need. Outside, a small group of supporters waited as Maya exited the building. Someone handed her a handwritten letter. She opened it later in the car. It read, "You don't know me, but I served too. I was afraid to speak. Watching you gave me courage. Thank you." It wasn't signed. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her journal. That night, she sat on the floor of her apartment again, Atlas curled up beside her, Victor dozing in the chair by the window. She opened her notebook and wrote under her earlier entry, "They gave me a medal, but more importantly, they gave me the microphone. I won't let either go to waste." She glanced at the medal on her table. It was beautiful, yes. But it wasn't proof of her survival. It was proof that someone, somewhere, finally listened. And tomorrow, she would make sure the rest of the world kept listening. The early morning sun spilled across the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, casting long golden lines between the marble columns. Maya stood at the base, her silhouette outlined against the rising light, dressed in a simple white blouse and dark slacks, no ribbons, no patches, only the Truth in Service medal gleaming above her heart. The world knew her name now, not because of what had been done to her, but because she refused to stay silent. Behind her, a gathering crowd began to form, veterans in faded uniforms, students with signs, activists, survivors, even children holding little flags. This was not a protest. It was a promise. She stepped to the microphone set at the top of the stairs, the same spot where others had once spoken of dreams and freedom. The nation was listening, cameras rolling, the live feed broadcasting across every major channel. Maya took a breath, her voice clear, calm, unwavering. I am not here today to celebrate what was done for me. I am here to speak for those who are still unheard. For the soldiers who came home only to be betrayed by the systems they served. For the ones who saw wrongdoing and were punished for speaking up. For every name that never made the headlines, your story matters. She paused as the wind lifted her curls gently around her face. The silence of the crowd was total. She looked out and saw Victor near the front, sitting tall in his wheelchair, Atlas resting loyally at his side, his harness now bearing an insignia of his own. Ellis stood next to him, arms crossed, tears welling in her eyes. Somewhere beyond them, members of Congress, Department of Defense officials, and press agents leaned forward, waiting. Maya continued. We were told to protect the Constitution. To honor justice. But too many times, those words were bent by power, twisted by fear, and silenced by rank. I lived through that silence. I nearly died in it. But silence did not win. Truth did. A ripple of quiet emotion spread through the crowd. She pressed forward. There is a cost to standing alone. But what if we didn't have to anymore? What if every time someone raised their voice, they saw 10 others rise with them? That is the future I choose. That is the legacy I want to leave, not one of bitterness, but of bravery. A group of younger veterans raised a banner behind the crowd. It read "Never silenced again." The words caught sunlight like flame. Maya turned toward them and smiled, a brief, human moment of connection that reached through every screen watching. I know this country is not perfect, she said, her tone deepening. But I also know it is capable of redemption. I have seen the darkest corners of our institutions, and I have lived to walk out of them. That's not a miracle. That's a challenge, to each of you, to be the light when others are afraid to open the door. The applause began as a quiet wave, then grew into thunder. Still, she didn't flinch. She let the sound wash over her, not as validation, but as energy. When it calmed, she gave her final words. This isn't the end of my story. It's the beginning of all the ones we haven't yet heard. If you are carrying the truth, don't bury it. Share it. If you see someone fighting for justice, stand beside them. And if you ever find yourself alone in the dark, remember, there are others like you, waiting to light the way. She stepped back from the microphone and raised her hand in a quiet salute. The crowd returned it, not with military precision, but with unity. Fists, palms, salutes, every hand raised was a signal of something bigger than protest. It was belonging. That night, as she returned to her apartment, Maya found herself restless. She pulled out her journal, flipping back through the pages filled with pain, discovery, and triumph. At the very end, she added a single line. They tried to silence me. But I found my voice. And I will never give it back. Atlas nudged her arm with his snout, resting his head on her lap. Maya smiled down at him, her fingers running through his fur. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find a young woman in uniform, clutching a folder, eyes wide with nervous awe. I'm sorry to bother you, Staff Sergeant, the woman said. I've been assigned to the new oversight team. I read everything. Your case. Your speech. I just wanted to say thank you. Maya opened the door wider and stepped aside. Come in. If you're here to serve the truth, you're welcome. As the door closed behind them, the light from the hallway spilled across the metal on the table, illuminating the words etched into the gold. Truth in service. It was more than metal. It was the future being forged, one voice, one story, one act of courage at a time. Maya Rodriguez had once been a name buried under false reports and sealed files. Now, it was a beacon. And as the night deepened over the capital, one thing had become certain. She would never be silenced again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?